Okay, everybody, I think we're just about ready to go. Apologies if anybody else wanders in. If they do, hide, yeah? Make it a game of hide and seek. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. My name's Andrew Jacobs. I'm Learning and Development Transformation Lead for HMRC. I say that and people go, oh, yeah. People who are not in the UK, we're the people who take tax. This is normally the Pope when people leave the room. I'm delighted to be chairing this session today for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I'm very interested in how we can use some of the VR and AR technology. I'm particularly thinking around in our workspace. As much as anything else, if I wasn't chairing this session, I'd be in this session. And that's because I've seen these guys' slides and I understand what they're going to be covering, and it looks like it's going to be some good stuff. So I know why I'm here. Now, I believe, were you all in the keynote this morning? Marcia Connor? She said, why are you really here? So I want you to turn to the person next to you and explain why you are really here in this session. Is it just so that you can go back to work and go, yeah, I saw a really interesting session about VR and AR? Or are you really here for a specific reason? So I would like you to, the person next to you, no more than a minute or so, just discuss why you are really in this session today. Go. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, I love that. The control. Okay, very quickly, couple of hands up. Why are you really here? Nice and loud. Gentleman at the very back. We've got the technology, but we don't know how to use it. Fabulous. Why else are we here? How can we use it in learning and how we can extract data from it to help us design better stuff, perhaps, yeah? Why are we really here? What difference does it make? That's a good one, I like that. I was thinking the same thing, actually, because I've done a few sessions at Learning Technologies, Olympia, and now here. What difference does the technology make? And that's a really good question. So, hopefully, well, not hopefully, I think you will get that from these sessions. If you haven't told us why you're really here, then we'll catch up with it afterwards. I'm going to introduce you to two gentlemen. First one is Ryan Peterson. Ryan is a founder of, remind me the name, Ryan? Finger Food Studios, thank you. And he's got some really interesting ideas around where the VR and AR space is going and some of the stuff that his organization's been doing. Secondly, we've got James. You all right, James?
Very good, thanks.
Cool. James from Royal Mail, who's actually done some stuff with VR and AR. So an enormous organization, 100,000? 150,000 employees, and they're using AR and VR. And he's going to show how they're actually using it. So we're split into two parts. Ryan first with some of the thinking, and then James with some of the actual doing that goes around it as well. About 20 minutes each, plenty of time for questions. And I really want to know what questions you're going to have about it as well. So I'll be putting some stuff out on Twitter. That's okay. I won't mention the fact that somebody just managed to spill water all over themselves. No, nobody saw it except the people laughing. 20 minutes for Ryan. We'll have a couple of questions. 20 minutes for James, a couple more questions, and then a proper conversation about it. So, first of all, Ryan Peterson.
Thank you for having me. Well, first of all, I want to get over finger food. Like, people always ask me, where did the name come from? So we were actually founded when the iPhone came out. So using your finger to feed yourself information. So there you go. It's kind of where it came from. So really happy to be here. I'm actually from Vancouver. There's a shot. Have anybody here been to Vancouver? Yeah. This is not how it is right now. It's more like this. So yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. Actually, we're having actually the biggest kind of storm in 2 decades right now. So it's actually much better to be here. But I'm not going to lie to you. I love it this time of year, big storms. I'm a big backcountry skier, so I spend a lot of time in the backcountry skiing up. This is up past Whistler. And With backcountry skiing, there's some risks. What do you think the big risk is? Yeah, absolutely, avalanches. You can maybe see where this is going. And avalanches are caused, very interesting, is like your storms come in, what happens on a certain amount of slopes, lots of snow, there's a big load, and there's a trigger event. A trigger event could just be another storm, or it could be like me. And that's right, I actually, last year, it's my, I've been skiing for many years, I was actually caught in an avalanche. I'm not gonna lie to you, pretty scary. I was skiing down, and it was really interesting. I actually felt something change. And I slowed down to figure out what that change was, and I realized I was an avalanche. And let's go to the next slide. And what's the first two words that come to your head with the avalanche? Guess? Yeah, that's right. Oh, shit. It's funny, things slow down, but I did have that in my head. And the second thing in my head, because every time we actually go up to backcountry skiing, we always practice kind of avalanche safety training. So you go through the practice. One, if you're in an avalanche, what to do. What's the second thing you want to do if you're in an avalanche? Kind of guess. Yell avalanche. People make it aware. Like, I've been in an avalanche. And right after that, I actually wear an airbag. Pull your airbag and go for a ride and try to stay up top. And so I actually did, this is kind of me after my avalanche. Really interesting, my buddy came down skied, hey, are you okay? I'm like, I think so, and I'm buried to my waist. He's like, great, I'm gonna go take some pictures. So he kept going, and so that's me. But it's very interesting. Now, I was in it, they call it a class 1.5, so kind of in between. So it was risky, I could have got hurt, but through my training, I was actually fine and got out of it. But kind of reflected a lot, obviously I thought about it over the course of the year. One of the things I realized, when I felt that change, if I would have kept up my speed, I would have never been caught in the avalanche. I would have probably skied on through, caused it, not even know it happened. And so this is kind of an interesting reflection point, because I think about business, and there is an avalanche of change happening, and there's a bunch of businesses that are not keeping pace, and those businesses are actually being wiped out. And you think about it, the same goes with work. Work is changing. Everybody here's job is being changing. Introduction of robotics, introduction of AI. And we think about even those kind of concepts, and I think of like the Internet of Things, like embedded intelligence. We're getting more and more data than we've ever had before. We're getting artificial intelligence, taking that data. I really think AI really takes complex data sets, turns that into information that we can actually use. We think of robotics. This is Pepper the Robot by SoftBank. It's being introduced, really it was big industry, but the costs are coming down. It's really being introduced in all aspects of our lives. We think of blockchain, powerful technology. Our whole supply chain is going to be rewritten from the ground up. And what I'm talking about today is holographic technology. I say holographic, I'm going to talk about AR, VR a lot, but there's the concept of extended reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, but let's just kind of encompass it in that one concept. And the trigger event for this avalanche, I think, in change in business is actually all those technologies becoming accessible at the same time. It's kind of a moment in time around business problems. And it's forcing companies to change rapidly, or companies around them are adopting them and just wiping them out, T-boning. The concept of being Amazoned. And what I'm going to talk about today is what we find as an organization. We find that augmented and virtual reality applications are really the tip of the spear for organizational change. And it's a great bellwether as a company whether or not you're actually staying ahead. Are you ahead of that avalanche of change? And this is a great quote. So at Fingerfood, we were very fortunate. So being in Vancouver, we're very close to Redmond. And so we've been working on the HoloLens before it was at the HoloLens. We actually had a team embedded down in Redmond working on it, doing some of the first applications. And this is a quote from John Howard, one of the creative directors. When creating new visual languages, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a hologram is worth 1,000 pictures. Absorb that for a moment. Because I think it's kind of profound. As I talk today, I keep coming back to that concept. I was always struck by that when he said to me. So I don't know who he stole it off from, because I know John pretty well, and he takes credit for it. So let's go to talk about a high level and kind of how AR, VR, and I'm talking about some of the very early kind of first applications, but how those first applications actually in some ways both change industries and even companies. So one of the first projects we actually did, so when we were actually down at Microsoft, we were actually invited down. They said, hey, we're going to work on this secret thing called the HoloLens. That's great. What are we going to be doing? We can't tell you yet. So we actually get down there as a team, and they're like, they wanted to introduce us like, well, we would like you to go. There's this big truck manufacturer called PACCAR. PACCAR, one of the biggest truck manufacturers in the world, you would know them. DAF Trucks, Leyland Trucks, Kenworth, Peterbilt. And we'd like to take the HoloLens, this new thing, maybe you can figure out what we could use it for, maybe invent a use case. And so we actually were walking through the R&D lab down in Renton, Renton, Washington, is where the R&D. And this is a picture I took. We're like, what are you doing over here? Oh, we're 3D printing a truck. You're 3D printing a truck? Why would you do that? Oh, that's how you design trucks. You actually make a clay model. The whole industry actually does that. I actually didn't know, but since like 1920, it was invented by GM. Hey, how do you visualize something large? Well, you make it out of dirt, I guess. But that process really hasn't changed. And we're like, I think we can change that. We're like, well, how long does it take you to build one of these? Well, we 3D print it, and then, I'm not kidding, by hand, this is a craft, they'll actually make it a perfect replication of the truck from AutoCAD. Executives will come in and say, I either like it or manufacture it, or I don't like it, and start all over again. And that process takes about 6 months. We think we can change that. So we actually worked internally. We had a team on that project, and we developed the first augmented reality truck design tool. And this tool actually was pretty profound because we were able to take the same data that those designers took to make the clay model. It took them 6 months. We took the same data, and we got that process down to 3 days. But more importantly, it wasn't just the time of 3 days, is that you could have n possibilities. Just using your hand, clicking through, you look at different fairing packages, different hoods, and actually get the other data, which is, well, how it affects how it goes through space and wind pressure. And completely transforming that process. And this is kind of a reference project that really kind of changed the industry. And if you go online, you can look right now, fact check me. But most companies have switched over to AR and VR for doing design. But someone asked in this, like, how do we do this? And more importantly, who did this? Now, this project was actually done over the course of 90 days. 90 days with 7 people. Changed an industry process, been around for 100 years. But look at the design, the makeup of that team. The team is basically more creative, storyboard, very little technology. Remember the accessibility of technology around business problems. And so that's a big thing. People, I think, the problems that we're trying to solve with AR/VR, they're much more design-centric than they are actually engineering-centric problems. And so that's kind of a mistake that some people make when you're building your teams. And it's funny, the very second application we did, and this is probably one of the first AR training apps ever, was actually one of their big problems is in recalls. They're very complicated systems, and they would have to do, if they were a recall, they'd actually send out specialists all over North America to teach people. Instead, we're like, well, why don't we just send an iPad and an app? They're like, that's a great idea. And so that was the second application that we did. And you can see, as I kind of referred to, the whole automobile industry is really kind of get behind. And I would say automobile industry is definitely leading in AR and VR, and a great place to look in terms of ideas for you to apply in your own organization. So how is AR, VR changing companies? We kind of talked about industries. There we go. So one of our clients, actually the second client, also introduced by Microsoft, I talk about Microsoft a lot here, was actually, we started working with Lowe's. Lowe's is a fascinating company. Does anybody know who Lowe's is? No one actually knows. Well, they're one of the biggest, kind of a Home Depot. They do about $60 billion a year in the United States, selling construction goods. So rather large company, huge retailer. And so one of the big problems in terms of a retail of that size, where do you even start? So we started working with their innovation team, and in terms of retail, in terms of like do-it-yourself constructions, one of the big things that they wanted to overcome is this concept of fear. So they wanted to use kind of AR, VR to help their consumer overcome the fear of failure. And really failing in doing your home renovations. So do it yourself. So actually the first app we actually created was just a very simple app using AR to actually go to redesign your bathroom. And once we actually get that, so people can overcome like, oh, I'm pretty comfortable with this house looks, but overcoming that next step, which is actually the how-to step. The how-to of actually, okay, now I'm actually going to go through a VR application. And by the way, we just thought this would be a good idea at the time. We're like, hey, let's try this in VR, do the kind of home renos. But here's the fascinating part of this, is that the science behind it, so there was basically a 40% better recollection of the steps by going through our VR training than not. That's like a step change from in the learning world. And again, the very next, they're like, oh, this is a great thing for our consumers. And the very next project was actually for their staff. So the next iteration, we actually use it to train their staff. And more importantly, 90% of the people that went through that training module actually said, I am more confident explaining to my customers, and my knowledge is better, so I feel more like an expert. So really transformative for Lowe's. And I love how Lowe's does things, and this is out, and you can kind of go online and look at some of the articles about it. But they do a little test. It's like 420 stores and thousands of people that go through. So this is real data that backs up. And at the same time, we were the only ones kind of playing in this space. Retailers, Walmart, kind of released last year, announced 150,000 devices for training, employee training. Obviously, NASA is definitely a leader in that space. We think of even KFC, and as I talked about, the automobile industry really leading that space. So that's kind of the reality. Like, AR, VR in training is definitely a thing. But I want to talk about maybe the hype side, because the difficulties of actually getting these projects off the ground. Even yesterday, I'm kind of giving the same talk to a potential client, and the barriers, they're like, well, we don't really believe in this. It just kind of works. This is really just for compliance. We got the checklist. It's like it's just too big of a barrier for some people to really buy into. So what I want to talk about next is like, well, how do you actually get, especially in your own organization, or to kind of buy into using AR, VR in kind of from a learning platform standpoint. And there's actually talk about this tomorrow, digital transformation. It's a thing, as I talked about, that avalanche of change being kind of driven by technology. There's actually a great global survey by KPMG. It talked about 71% of all CEOs are really taking charge of their digital transformation programs. And to put it another way, there's about 71% of global CEOs are worried about losing their own job because of this avalanche of change. I mean, it's pretty obvious that things are changing more faster and faster. And one of the big things, when we think of kind of jobs of the future and digital transformation, the big thing is learning. You have to bring, if you're not going to digitally transform your organization, if you don't actually transform your workforce at the same time. And actually, I'm going to read this quote. So a good friend of mine from, again, KPMG, but down in the US, digital transformation will be most successful when we have developed learning platforms that develop the skills that individuals need to source, procure, and synthesize information instead of recollecting and regurgitating facts and understanding. And I think that's an important piece, is that aligning yourself with these digital transformation programs, again, executive buy-in is really important. The projects I talked about at PACCAR and talked about at Lowe's, we were within one level of the CEO. I think that's a kind of a critical component to be successful in getting these projects up the line, is before you even start your project, do you have executive buy-in on a big issue? The second thing I want to talk about is, so before I go into digital twin, is your IT department. So I got another little story fact. We did this amazing app. I can't talk about the client, but amazing application, transformative for the company. And we go to the IT department. We're all really excited. We're like, hey, this is going to change the way learning happens at your company. And they're like, ITs, this is great, and this is on the HoloLens. Like, this is great. We just got to wait until we're done our Windows 10 upgrade for the company. We're like, oh, well, when is that going to be done? Well, about 2 years from now. I'm just like, oh, just part of me died inside. So having your IT department alongside right at the beginning, I think, is actually really critical. And as I talk about this concept of a digital twin. Again, this is a thing, a digital twin, and I kind of encapsulate it here. Think about all that technologies and be able to really create your own simulation engine for your company. And IT departments are really kicking off those projects. And again, you can go online, you can read a lot about this. And again, executive buy-in, and then grabbing this kind of digital twin concept that I know all IT departments are kind of buying into, allows you to start to get kind of traction with, hey, how can I use AR and VR in my company? And the third thing, and this is really important, so I call them shelf apps. So a lot of AR and VR apps initially, you kind of create these kind of one-off experiences, and then what happens is they're really, really cool, and then they sit on the shelf and never get used again. And I think how many people have done this before? Any AR, VR? I've have shelf apps. And so you need to kind of think up front, about this concept of build platforms, not apps. So being kind of aligned with your corporate strategy, being aligned with IT strategy, and then actually thinking about building systems that can actually scale through your organization. So my big thing is life is short. Like, I don't want to start projects that I know that are going to hit the ditch. So I'm actually giving this a real advice. This is stuff we talk about. We don't sign things unless we know people are going to actually use it. And big thing in projects now is there's a concept of continuous improvement. Like the first release is never the last release. Continuous improvement means you're always working on these projects. And unless you have a real kind of a platform-centric concept, you can have these projects that will quickly die. And finally, trying to sell in organizations, and this is fascinating. I kind of sell, there's the three kind of things that kind of get people's attention in terms of how to get funding for projects. I can just do this funding, I can increase revenue, better sales force, reduce costs, so I can, if we do this, it's going to save a bunch of money. But I'll be honest, I never get a lot of traction with clients around those ideas. They don't necessarily care. That makes sense about reducing costs. It's not what gets them excited and that kind of unlocks money for kind of riskier ideas. What does get people excited is reducing risk. And I'll kind of talk about very specific examples. And so this is something when you're looking in your company, someone asks which problems to solve first, find something around risk, stuff that can T-bone your company. Again, be Amazoned. And so the case that I'm talking about, so this is a client, it's one of our clients, Enbridge Pipelines. They're probably one of the biggest energy, they are the biggest energy infrastructure company in North America. And so pipelines, what do you think their biggest risk is? Pretty obvious. Pipeline spills. In fact, the pipeline spills cost Enbridge about $1 billion. But more importantly, just the whole industry doesn't want it because it's a social license to actually build pipelines. And it's a big thing if you read news in Canada, the US, we don't want to build more pipelines because of climate change. So it's really, really important. So high risk item. So working with the Enbridge, and we were doing some ideation sessions, we actually kind of started asking questions, and we found this small group called the Pipeline Integrity Group, but they had huge impact to the company. What a great place to start with kind of introducing new technologies. And when there is an incident, people probably know this right now, where there's a pipeline incident, a lot of the work, actually, these companies still comes down to paperwork. Big reports. I make fun of McKinsey. They're not here right now, are they? So McKinsey reports. See, we're 14 minutes, okay. McKinsey reports, stacks of paper, but when we think of actually these types of incidents, it's pretty critical to go back in time, and they really try to figure out what were the steps, what were the precursor events that led to such one of these incidents. And so we kind of took hey, I think we can actually build an application for you that can kind of transfer in that process, really take it from paper into the concept of a digital twin of a scenario. So this is actually, we're actually demoing this at actually the KPMG booth, just as day 20. So you can go see it after the talk, or one of the breaks. And it's really interesting because we built a digital twin of, this is Cheecham Slopes. There was actually a pipeline spill. And very interesting, what causes pipelines to break? Earth moving. So, and also from the top, so really was thinking about storms, big type of, same thing with an avalanche. You basically have a bunch of storms, Earth starts moving, pipelines break. And so they monitor these kind of high-risk sites. And so we're actually able to go and build a digital simulation, so a digital twin, and not just 3D, but in 4 dimensions. The fourth dimension is time, so you can actually scrub back in time and forward and actually walk through in a collaborative environment to actually see what happens. And this has actually taken 120 different data sources and to kind of be able to visualize. Now you can say, an engineer would say, well, I don't really need this, I can get it on a 2D screen, but that's just if you're an engineer. This really was a tool, a very powerful tool created, learning tool for all stakeholders involved. And also, the IT department loved this because they have this, hey, concept of a digital twin, allowed them to really do a bunch of projects around data governance. So kind of, and then the executives love it, because if you go to Enbridge's website, look at, we're innovating stakeholders. So you can start to see how this hits check marks, a really innovative project that actually showed some real change. And this is kind of another kind of reference projects a lot of people are doing around the world. There we go. So you kind of go back to your organization. I want to leave you with kind of one use case that if you don't have something kind of started, this will definitely get it kickstarted. And by the way, this is my closing kind of pitch to most people about, well, why should we invest in AR, VR? And so cybersecurity is probably one of the biggest risks to my company. You know, if I was hacked, I would go out of business because I'd lose the trust of my clients. They hire us because we're supposedly experts in technology. So I actually spent a lot of money. What I'm not really worried about people hacking a Cisco router. What I'm worried about is social engineering, people trying to hack in my people and get access to the data that we have. And so we actually have invested a lot in basic infrastructure around training. And I'll be honest, it is terrible. And I can see why hackers are winning the war, because you don't really have the tools out there for really sophisticated attacks. And I think, and this is really industry-wide problem, because whether or not it's mining, you know, infrastructure, healthcare, especially in Britain, you guys all know about the ransomware. You know, someone just pressed the wrong button on a phishing scam, locked down, people lost a bunch of computers and data. Retail, credit card, we hear this over and over again about credit cards getting hacked. Again, how this is happening, and they don't really talk about this publicly, it's not someone like some hacker sitting behind a screen and actually hacking into some system. That's very rare. Really, it is social engineering, someone actually working someone to get access and get the passwords. And the problem is, it's not just, and especially in finance, it's not just hackers, criminals, but it's also even countries that are trying to game you and taking a very long game. So these are very serious concepts that people are having to deal with. And this is where I think AR, VR can play an absolute critical role. Because remember I talked about that recollection going through events? Like social engineering is about going through as many different scenarios as possible. And again, as I referred to in the Lowe's example, like a 40% uptick in kind of recollection, like that is a step change versus going through, clicking through some web app of like, hey, if someone calls you, like I've been through my training myself. So I think this is a really good area that's kind of an area to kind of start with that is kind of cross, you know, any different industry to basically inspire, how's that, your company or your division to really start thinking about how you can apply AR and VR to learning. And just to kind of go back, I like this, I'm gonna take a step back. I made this just for this show, so take a picture. So, you know, one of the big things that I've been thinking about as I put together this presentation is this concept of building a moat. And your competitive moat around training, and you say digital transformation process is really getting your executive buy-in around how my company needs to change, getting your IT department bought into what you're doing, and then basically every different AR and VR application, I call that kind of a window into that world that you're creating that allows your organization to move faster and faster and faster, allows your organization to continuously, remember that concept of continuous improvement, but as your organization has to continuously change faster and faster and faster, or you yourself as an organization are going to get caught up, see if this actually works, and an avalanche. This is not me, by the way, but that'd be wicked if it was. But you can stay, if you keep your speed up, stay ahead of that change. Thank you.
Like I said, we will have a Q&A afterwards. Has anybody got a burning question for Ryan straight away? No? Okay. That's cool. That's cool. I'll work with that. I have had an interesting question from outside the room, which is somebody downstairs at the conference said, where's all this AR, VR stuff that we've been hearing about for the last few years? So they're going around the exhibition downstairs and they're not seeing the AR, VR stuff. So where is it?
I think that's a great comment. It's at, some of the first projects, quite frankly, these are Fortune 500 companies in North America, so big organizations that can afford to take that risk. So a lot of this stuff is still custom development. And so the cost, and I do know a lot of developers, we're just building now platforms that's definitely more accessible. And the cost of devices, big thing, HoloLens came out with a $5,000 device. Now there's a HoloLens 2 announcement on February 24th. You can imagine it's going to be cheaper, going to be more robust, actually going to work on enterprise networks. So I think you're going to see that more and more down in the hall, and I see there are a few down there, AR and VR, so I think it's really just a timing thing. So really initially, really big investments up front, and now you're actually seeing the smaller, medium-sized businesses and more platform-centric stuff coming out later. Yeah.
That was really interesting for me. Like I said, trying to get my head around, particularly the digital divide piece. That's an interesting one, and digital twins, which I'll come back to in the Q&A. What was also interesting was to look at the Lowe's case study. Introduce you now to James Barton. And we're really going to take a bit of a deep dive into a case study now, because the stuff that James has done at Royal Mail is really interesting. James, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, I'm James Barton, the Online Learning Manager at Royal Mail, which is the worst job title ever. So hopefully it's going to change soon. For anybody from outside the UK, Royal Mail is the UK's preeminent delivery service, and that line is taken straight from our annual report. It's what we're officially supposed to say. What that means in practice is that we have the universal service licence for the UK, which means we go to every single address 6 days a week. And it means in terms of the volume we carry, in terms of things like parcels, we carry more than all of our competitors combined, which is really scary when you think about it. So I work in our group learning and development team, and we're a very tiny team in the centre. So everything that we do is focused on, well, my role in particular is focused on curating and creating digital learning experiences, but also tapping into the digital transformation that's going on in the organisation and really role modelling that change to help the business bump itself along. So we are a tiny team, and we have a limited budget as well. So a massive organisation, 150,000 people, not very much money, particularly at the moment, with profit warnings and all of that kind of stuff going on. So we have to make every project and every penny count. And I'm sure that's a feeling that's going to be common to a lot of people in this room. So today, what I want to do is show you that virtual reality is actually within your reach right now, if only you simplify enough, by taking you through the story of how we put a virtual reality experience into Royal Mail, which is a very operational, challenging organisation. So, what is the challenge? Well, when I talk about dog safety to people outside of Royal Mail, we usually start off with people sort of thinking about, Dennis the Menace and Gnasher and stuff out of the Beano, and this cliche of the postman always being chased by the dog. And actually this morning my mum sent me a really helpful good luck text to say, don't worry, it's going to be fantastic. I said, my old dog Duke that always used to chase the postman. I thought, yes mum, and I told you every time I came to visit it's not funny and all of that good stuff, but it's really embedded into popular culture. People almost expect postman to be chased. Yeah, it's not good. Because last year, 2,275 of my colleagues were attacked, and that's 44 a week, which is absolutely ridiculous when you really stop and think about it. But we've got over 85,000 people walking up and down garden paths 6 days a week to 30 million addresses, which nobody else does. It's our really unique quantity. And that's where the risk comes from, and people really struggle to put their own safety first when they're faced with a customer and trying to do them a favour. So this is a bit where it gets slightly emotional, because back in 2010, which feels like forever ago because it was, I was trying to save up to go and do a master's in the south of France. Great life choice. The trade-off was actually having to get a job and save up said money. So I went and got a job at Parcel Force, which is a Royal Mail brand for all of our express delivery stuff. And I worked as a collection and delivery driver for a period of time, which is the best job in the world, because you're being paid to drive around the countryside all day, giving people things that they want to receive. It's absolutely fantastic. But one day things didn't go quite to plan. So I'd gone to a house, and in the front garden there were what I can only describe as attack geese. At a boarded up front door. I thought that's really not a very good idea. So I went around to the back entrance, which the usual delivery person knew you had to do something special or what have you. And the long story short is that I'd got a screw-fix parcel. The person was a tradesman, and if I didn't get it delivered that day, he'd have to drive back to the depot sort of 40 minutes away. And so I didn't follow policy or process. I went through the gates, and I got bitten by an Alsatian. which was a pretty traumatic experience. So I've actually got permanent scarring on my right arm. Like at Royal Mail, I'll often roll up my shirt sleeve when postmen say, "What do you even know about that?" Well, that's what I know about that. And the impact is really immediate. So you think, I was trying to do the customer a favour. Well, what happened to the customer? So the customer got their parcel on time. They also got a bleeding delivery person sat in their utility room while we waited for a manager to send 2 people out in a van, one to pick me up and take me to hospital, where I gave my wife the shock of her life because she worked in one of the shops in the hospital at the time, just showed up with my shirt hanging off and blood everywhere. But the other person, of course, to collect my van and continue delivering. So all good for that customer. They got their parcel. The 70 people I hadn't got to yet all got theirs late. And also, we lost the person out to do that, somebody to take me to hospital. And this all scales up really scarily and really quickly when you think about it. And the customer experience for everybody else is absolutely awful, all because I tried to do somebody a favour. And this is something that we see all over the place, is people trying to help. You know, we haven't got postmen who are really reckless. We haven't got postmen who are sort of trying to cut corners necessarily to help themselves. They're trying to help the customer. And that's the thing that we're really struggling to break down. And the thing is that actually, you know what, so I've got a bit of a scar, I was off for a few days, but it wasn't that bad really, like I don't really like Alsatians now, but it was all right, but a lot of my colleagues are left with seriously life-changing injuries when they've just gone to work to deliver a parcel, and it's really not nice. Now, luckily for all of you, I haven't got nasty pictures with me, so we've got a massive book of them at work, and they're really horrendous. But they don't seem to be overly effective because of a few of the things that we have found. My click's not working. Fantastic. So, over the years, it will be no surprise to know that we've tried to do lots of different things about this. So we've tried pretty much everything going. We've done big sort of public awareness campaigns. You see our group safety director every year in the summer in Dog Safety Week on BBC breakfast programmes, doing all of that stuff to try and help owners take more responsibility. We've done lots of videos, brochures, booklets, slogans, cards, posters, anything you can possibly think of. And we've had a relatively steady reduction in dog attacks of about sort of 6 to 8% every year, but we're still left with 2,275, and that's an awful lot. And the feedback that we had from colleagues about the things that we've done in the past are sort of around 3 key themes, really. So the first is that we sheep dip people. Now, when you're sheep dipping 85,000 people, it brings with it a lot of compromises. So postmen don't have ready access to technology. The only thing we've got really for them is a plasma screen in every delivery office where they all have to stand around in a one-to-many session, which isn't ideal, which drove the behaviours in the past of lots of video content pushed that everybody doesn't pay attention to. And we also had feedback about the optimism bias. Nobody believes that it's going to happen to them, so they keep putting the customer first. They keep all those things that you say, but always put the customer first. Yeah, but safety does come before that. But nobody believes that it's going to happen to them. And you get a lot of the talks around the office of, oh, well, if a dog tries to bite me, And it doesn't work. You know, when a dog's trying to attack you, you know, everything goes into slow motion. You have a slight oh dear moment, and then you get bitten. There isn't a chance to do anything. So sort of all of that bravado that's tied up with our operational culture is really challenging. You know, and the third thing is that operational culture. So if I'm in a one-to-many session and I've got some sensitive questions to ask about my experiences, I can't really do it. I've got a colleague who, and don't laugh at this point because it reinforces it, but who was attacked by a cat and so got really badly scratched and felt that he couldn't go back and tell his colleagues or his boss because everybody would laugh at him. And you kind of go, it's really horrendous. The poor man, you know, hand's awful, but that's what we're dealing with. So the sheep dipping in particular had really forced us down a particular route. So the first thing that we really wanted to think about was, if we took away the sheep dipping constraints, how can we do things differently? Because we're not getting the maximum outputs for our inputs at the end of the day. So that was the first thing we really wanted to think about. The safety team went away, beavered away, and came up with their highest impact units and the highest risk profiles, which was all very helpful. In terms of the optimism bias, this is where we're really talking about the realism. People don't believe it will happen to them, and I can't actually take postmen out and put them in front of dogs because that really isn't good when they get bitten, and we have to do all sorts of things. But we want them to experience that oh dear moment just as the dog's about to get you, when you've made a simple decision that isn't quite right, and you really get to feel it for yourself. And in terms of the operational culture, we wanted to try and remove that from the equation as much as we could. So we wanted to create something that was truly personal, and this is kind of where the VR stuff starts floating around, because we wanted to isolate those colleagues from the rest of the environment. Because what happens at the moment is that you're stood at your sorting frame, sorting your post, there's sort of banter and everything going on, and you get told, right, come and stand in front of that screen for 10 minutes and watch that video. There's no buffer between what you've been doing and sort of the environment around you and then learning, and it just doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So what we wanted to do was sort of give managers and give our workplace coaches, our safety advisors, this sort of whole experience script to get people out of the day job, to sort of transport them within the space of 20 meters into a different place, and then use the sort of the immersive isolating effects of VR to actually give them their own space. And that was a really nice idea, but obviously we do actually have to make sensible decisions. So we're a very cost-conscious organisation. To get financial approval to do anything at all is incredibly challenging, and we have to prepare very robust cases for everything. At the moment, the group as a whole has got a massive cost reduction target, and as a learning team, we've got to make commercial decisions every day to support that. There's no other choice, and it's something that we need to be part of. So every bit of spend needs to deliver value, and we just haven't got the budget or the inclination to just support nice days out. And we've been keeping an eye on the market for a couple of years, not specifically for this project, but just thinking about ideas where this kind of technology may have an impact. And it was really one of those sort of coincidental things where some of our lovely colleagues at Sponge just happened to show us a demo of a technique that would hit the right price point, time, and everything. Thought, that's a really nice idea, wonder what we'll use it for. And then a couple of weeks later, the safety director picked up the phone. It all kind of flowed from there in that way that things do in films and stuff like that. And it really doesn't feel real. So the real advantage was that the approach that was pitched took all of the complexity out of everything. So we were effectively running a regular sort of video e-learning project, or at least that's what it felt like. Because we're such a small team, we need stuff we work on to be very practical and easy to do. So from our perspective, a 360 video shoot is just like a regular video shoot, except you have to duck a lot more and find places to hide. But the rest of the process actually feels really similar. So everybody understands it and can go along with it. So people from safety who've worked on learning before, they show up, know what's going on. The union guy who was sent to supervise and make sure we were doing things properly. And it was all, all really seamless. And we did some sensible things like not using complex dog actors that are actually going to bite people. We just thought, if we get somebody bitten on the shoot for the dog safety video, we will never live it down, ever, ever, ever. Other things, using professional actors and actors who've got a mixture of stage and screen experience, because when they're acting in 360, it's really not like conventional filming. So we tried to make life easy for ourselves as well. And then the availability thing is, again, another piece of amazing timing. So we had a policy change a few years ago about who got smartphones. I mean, back when I joined the business, I got given a Nokia brick that looked like a BlackBerry but wasn't, which is the most frustrating thing in the world. But now all of our regional sort of safety people and people deploying stuff have actually got smartphones. So when we were looking at this issue of the IT hardware out there in the operational, there isn't any. There isn't any. And if we were sheep dipping, that would be a problem because we have to use the screens. But because we're not sheep dipping and we're focusing, we go, great, there's no technology, so we can kind of do what we like and use those smartphones. And we also had some research that said our frontline colleagues, well, 40% of them would be willing to use their own devices at work. We kind of thought, oh, that's interesting. So let's see what happens if we actually sort of use the constraints as an opportunity and go straight into something mobile instead. But recognising that, of course, we still need to make it available on other platforms because, our operational managers have all got laptops, stuff like that, gives them more flexibility. So rather than wrapping stuff up in a really complex way into apps and doing all of that kind of like corporate license enterprise nonsense, we had everything web hosted so that we had optimized versions, but it just kept stuff super simple. Now, I want to show the demo now, which sort of feels like it's in the middle of stuff, but I'm hoping it's going to work as well. So it's on the click, isn't it? Is it? Hey, right. So this is a typical Royal Mail delivery office, and we join. The thing is, I don't need to call him Carl. We've used the same actor for lots of different roles, and the character of the manager started off as a postman, has evolved through our projects. So we've had a brief introduction to the task. So we're taking out a new joiner on their first day at Royal Mail. So this is Melanie, and she encounters a dog out there on the street. So a reasonable proportion of our attacks happen actually out there on the street. Now this is part of the situation that my mum was talking to me about this morning, when the postman comes along with treats and goes, oh, I know the dog, I'm going to give them some treats, keep them sweets. But our whole approach to dog safety is based around the acronym AVOID, which A in AVOID stands for avoid. If you see a dog, stay away, because you just don't know. You know, the safety of our people is the most important thing. Just keep away. And then we go through into value yourself, observe, inform, and defend. So the format of this is you make your decision. Melanie, as the new joiner, will then give you feedback, and we'll pass back over to the manager to give you slightly more formal feedback that will reinforce the key learning points from the experience. And this is the format that we'll see throughout the scenarios that we experience. I've skipped us ahead to D, because this is the one that people always want to see. So this is defend yourself. So this is where the dog's there, and you have to decide what to do. So we had a very well-played stroppy customer who wouldn't shut her dog away. So you have to choose whether to take the owner's assurances or not. And challenging customers is a really tricky thing for our frontline staff to do. And as you'll see in a second, the dog will magically appear. You'll also notice there isn't a blind in that first pane of the window, because the dog that we were using actually trashed our colleague's house that we were borrowing, which is really awful, because her husband came back at the end of the day and said, I thought you said they were only going to be outside. He said, oh, well, they needed something to watch, to watch the filming from. He said, well, why did the dog have to be in here? It's awful. But Rachel did a fantastic job of effectively shutting down her street for 2 days by being very kind to her neighbours. It was incredible. We couldn't have done it otherwise. So in terms of actually sort of making this work and practical, because we sort of, again, had all of these really nice ideas, but what are we going to do? So the familiarity of the process, I know I've mentioned it already, but it's such a big thing. It made it so easy for us to do and work on. And this is actually the guys. It's a slightly strange looking picture, actually. So this is when we're doing the manager feedback scenes. And yeah, that was the thing, simplicity of process. Everything was made simple. The second thing was basic kit. So we weren't issuing smartphones. We were relying on the smartphones that were already issued. So all I had to buy were a bunch of 20 quid VR headsets and some headphones because, yeah, people moaned when we didn't send them headphones, so we sent headphones. And that meant that I could send every one of our safety advisors a couple of kits across the country, so we could actually pilot nationally in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do with any more complex technology. And thirdly, the heavily targeted approach comes back again. So by sort of zeroing in on the highest impact units and the highest risk people within those, again, we're then looking at pretty much 5,000 to 6,000 people, not 85,000, across 54 safety advisors. It's about, 13 a month, something like that. It's really not so bad because they're out there all the time visiting their units. They're there anyway. They own those units. It's really good. And it allows the deployment function to actually own deployment, because normally we sit in the centre and sort of set the structures to ridiculous degrees, and then the people in the regions call up and say, oh, this is ridiculous. You don't know our area. We don't know our units, all of this stuff. So you're going, okay, well, here's the overarching targets. You know your areas, here's the kit. Go and do your own thing. And it's working really well. So the key things that we've learnt from this experience are that availability of headsets, despite saying this is going to be really, really targeted, funnily enough, as soon as we started talking about VR, everybody wanted it. So it's been a real challenge in terms of managing expectations. And this is what our safety advisors have told us. Once they've taken it to one unit in the area, all the managers are on the phone wanting to roll it out. Likewise, our frontline union are very keen that all their members should have the opportunity to complete it. So this has been really challenging. We're not used to things being disproportionately successful. We usually worry about things not being taken up. So it is nice to be popular, but it brings with it its own challenges. Network connectivity, it was actually one of the aims of this pilot, was to say, how robust is the connectivity across the Royal Mail estates? Can we do it in this really simple web-hosted way? Does it work? Doesn't it work? And the feedback is, it works most of the time, but when it doesn't work, it's really quite annoying. And what we wanted to do, when we started all of this off, we wanted to do it the cheapest, quickest way possible, and we were using the pilot to then assess any extra investments. So thanks to some very kind safety people filling in feedback forms and me sitting down with the world's biggest calculator and sort of hourly rates and all of that stuff, it's stacking up that it's actually going to be an efficiency measure to then wrap up the offline measure in terms of the operational hours that we'll save, which is good. The inclusion of a broader stakeholder group is really, it's this love-hate relationship with IT that was brought up earlier, and it really is. So when we go to IT with some of these things, they say, oh, but it has to sit on the Royal Mail network. You go, oh, that means that frontline people can't access it, and you have all of that back and forth. So we sort of very subversively just did it all without IT, and then hit a slight snag with our iPhones. And that actually happened when I was 1,000 miles away in Italy on holiday. And I got back and my boss said, why did this thing happen? Why is it always when you're on holiday? Why is it always when you're on holiday? So IT graciously helped us out, but it is that trade-off between how much involvement you give people. And the last point really is the disconnect between leadership commitments and reality on the ground, I think, is everybody's problem ever. We've got some very, very enthusiastic senior leaders, both in safety and operations, very resilient people as well. But when you're the safety advisor in sort of Wolverhampton delivery office on a wet, rainy Tuesday morning and things aren't quite working, it's quite different and quite challenging. And we really need to think about the support model for things like this that sit outside of our regular HR offering, because that's something that we hadn't fully considered. Now, I've got some results so far, and it's really worth qualifying with the so far. So this actually only made it out there in November, and for people that understand Christmas, you'll know that obviously that's going to be our busiest time of year. As soon as November hits, parcel volumes go absolutely crazy, and we're just inundated through to January, where returns then become an organisational challenge. But despite that, our persuasive safety colleagues have actually managed to get into 15% of high impact units. And these stats are actually only covering into the end of December in reality, because we haven't got the latest cut in here. And that means that the experience has been run 746 times. Now, one of the interesting things about that is that 30% of those instances of it having been run were on Android, and we don't issue Android devices. So we've actually got this extra support for the notion of people being willing to use their own devices, which is fantastic, really fantastic. And it's also obviously intended as a mobile-first thing. So it's no surprise that the vast majority of people do use it on mobile. But what's interesting to me is that in something that's mobile first, our split is 80% mobile, 20% desktop, which is completely the opposite for our other stuff that's desktop, laptop first, which is 80-20 the other way. It's just a nice piece of symmetry. And this is the nice business output, which is since week 38, which is the week before Christmas, so the last point at which these sites were visited, 54% of them haven't had a single dog attack. Now, when you start looking at the overall thing, the 44 a week, and start totting it up, sort of Christmas is one of the two peak times of the year for dog attacks. So it's summer holidays, children alone with dogs, not controlling them as well as they ordinarily would be, and Christmas, because we deliver loads of parcels, delivering parcels requires the door to be opened, lets the dog out. So actually at Christmas, we usually see a stark increase in the number of dog attacks. So to have none in that 54% is absolutely fantastic. And for that sort of population of units, the average in the 8 weeks preceding that have been between 1.5 and 6.5 dog attacks a week for them, which, you know, when you think about those postmen not being bitten, on a personal level is fantastic, and it is saving us money as a business. So now for the personal feedback from our lovely colleagues. So the reason that you'll see a couple here from Liverpool is that Merseyside traditionally has had a real issue with dog attacks, and it's not a Royal Mail thing, that's a general thing. And both Royal Mail and the Communication Workers Union have been involved in the Merseyside Dog Safety Partnership that was set up by the University of Liverpool. So we're really keen to do some work up in that part of the country. And we were really taken by a conversation that one of our union reps had had with Sean, who actually was somebody who'd had a dog attack in the past, but was also moved by the experience that he had taking part in this. We're also incredibly passionate about accessibility, and when it came to this virtual reality project, it caused us an awful lot of head scratching. So I can remember the debate in the office. We were talking about our need to provide a version for colleagues with audio impairment. It's an area that we really do need to cover. And then we were having this big debate about how subtitles break the immersion or help the immersion and all of this kind of stuff. And it went round in circles, and we ended up with sort of a neat compromise. So we split out the accessible and inaccessible versions, and we positioned the subtitles so that whichever way you look, you're always aware of them, and you can adjust your gaze to frame them to suit you, if that makes sense. Because the original idea, which had been to almost like attach the speech to the characters speaking, of course, you have no idea that it was there if you were looking a different direction. So we really did have to give that some thoughts, and it's really nice to get the feedback from colleagues using that in real life that appreciate that it's there. It's really important for us. And then finally, if it clicks, my lovely colleague Nick, who is the Safety, Health and Environment Engagement Manager, slightly better job title than mine, maybe, I don't know, discuss. But Nick, like many people in the business, started his career as a postman many years ago. He won't appreciate me saying so many manys. But Nick had also been bitten by a dog himself. So one of the interesting things was, with all the Royal Mail people sat around the table, people, in central management roles now, most of the people sat around the table had an experience back in the day. But Nick, all of his work focused on communications and engagements, and this has been the thing that's made the biggest impact for him in terms of talking about dog safety, which is just lovely to hear. And really the key takeaway from all of this rambling is supposed to be that, we're an operational organisation, we're cost challenged, and if we can do it, there's no reason that anybody else can't. The principles that we've applied are simplicity, and that's allowed us to do it. So thank you very much for listening.
Now you can see why I wanted to do this session. That was seriously cool. Questions? And immediately the hands spring up. I'll tell you what, I'll head this way. Go here first.
Thanks. I just wanted to know quickly, what was the platform you hosted the 360?
Oh, God, this is where I have to ask somebody at Sponge. Right? So I'm very much the practical deployment. But if you pop over to stand D50, they'll be able to explain all of the technical...
D or E?
At D50.
D50.
They'll be able to explain all the technical in and outs.
I just wanted to offer a sort of DIY answer to that question, which is YouTube. So we've deployed a bunch of 360 videos, and YouTube is fantastic because you can view it on a flat screen and move it around, or you can put on goggles and inhabit it, and it does all of the rendering of the multiple video streams to turn it into one.
With the interaction?
Yeah, and sorry, not all the layers of interactivity, you're right.
James, extrapolating those figures that you've got out, what does that do to the 44 attacks a week, do you think, in the next sort of 6-12 months?
God, you know what? That's really quick maths to try and do off the top of my head. The reason that it's challenging is because we have peaks and troughs at the end of the day. So the Christmas period is atypical, but really what we're aiming for, if the average reduction is sort of 8%. The figures are based on roughly speaking, sort of 1.5, 2 times that. and that gets us the cost balance that we need. But really, we're not sure what's going to happen, which is why we're doing an awful lot of measurements and getting the safety team to really do some heavy lifting locally on it, because they've got fantastic data. It's just getting it all back together again.
Questions? Yeah.
Ryan, this is totally different level of application from what you do and what we have seen here. What do you think would be the next step? I mean, I don't think learning and development will have the money and time to do like automobile industry does. But what can you do in order to go to the next step? I mean, we have the 360 and have some interaction. Is there anything that we can do that won't cost millions of dollars? And the second thing is about data. Which data we could be gathering from the experience?
Yeah, no, I think there's a few things. I want to answer the first question first. I mean, one of the great things about these applications is actually the data and analytics that you get from. I think that's kind of a missing piece when you develop these apps is put in data. What are people looking at? How much time do they spend on stuff? Where do they stalling out? I mean, that's a great thing about creating this is you get that kind of real-time feedback, and it helps you kind of optimize your experience. So I think in terms of answering like what is kind of the next generation experiences, you know, that's going to come with kind of the next generation of devices that are coming out. You know, we are now spending a lot of time actually in mobile, especially in AR. All companies, VR is a niche, to be frank. Everybody's investing in AR. So Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, and you're going to see these devices come out. That'll be kind of the next generation of experiences. And I think it's going to be, again, really from a point of like data-driven design to kind of achieve and tune the results that you want.
I'm just wondering what you think are the sticking points for organizations not adopting VR technology.
Well, to begin with, to be frank, it was cost. I think it comes up a lot. And history kind of is, it's a great lesson. I actually had a slide in there, but I didn't have enough time. Andrew's had to keep me on track. But if you go back in time, you think of just computers in general. When computers first came out, you know, no one could afford it except either, you know, defense, which is where it starts, and big, massive companies. Magically enough, that's where I'm spending a lot of my time because that's where money for this is coming out. And I think but there's a lot of startups that are investing in building platforms. So think about accounting. So IBM used to have massive machines to do real-time accounting systems in the 1970s, but it was, you know, $50 million machines. And then along came Intuit came out and released something on the PC and completely transformed small business accounting practices. So I think in AR and VR, really what we're waiting for is those startups and companies to be releasing software platforms for the masses, and then you're going to see much greater adoption. Because right now, frankly, it's custom engineering to do some of these projects, which is the most expensive way to develop software.
Any more questions? Oh. One here first.
To Royal Mail, please. Oh my God, it was very high. You use now this new technology, and you got some kind of mind shift and a behavioral change with your mailmen and the people in the offices. What is your next step using the VR? Was it just for this one dilemma that you had? What did you think about the broader implementation?
So can you just repeat that?
For Royal Mail.
I thought, yeah.
So I like the simplicity of it for the many people. And they already did a change in behavior, actually learning this way. Did you have a plan already to go into other areas of implementation of the same technology? Dilemmas that you might have?
Yeah, so we've got some dilemmas that lend themselves very well to it, and some that really don't. So one of the ones that really doesn't actually is something that somebody asked me about a couple of months ago. They said we're implementing a new way of sorting mail, and you know, could we use this to simulate sorting posts? I thought, oh well, just out of interest, is all the equipment that they need to do it in the office, and have you got the post in the? And you can kind of see where that one's going, just use the stuff that's there to actually do it. However, we've got some really great examples of stuff that we're thinking about that we would like to do. So one of them is the doorstep experience. So we've got 85,000 people walking up and down people's garden paths, and they're the face of Royal Mail. They are the main touch point for people. You know your local postman, and the experience you have, and it's sort of quite inconsistent depending on where you are. And that's an area we're really keen to explore because of the behavioural nature, being able to get some of that data back out. But also we can't send people out with people the whole time, sort of checking how it's going. And we want to be able to put people into realistic scenarios, because when you're role-playing something with your colleague, it never really feels quite right, and it usually descends into silliness. So that's the most interesting one. The safety people, obviously, now they've started playing with this, want to look at their other high areas of safety risk. So another big one, it's not exciting, but slips and trips, you know, but it's a big ticket issue. But really,
the one I'm thinking of is manual handling. You know, just the lifting of parcels and stuff.
Yeah,
There's going to be something in that space.
Yeah, that would be something to explore, but we've got a very complicated.
Just giving you a job.
dive in. But really, we want to see how effective this is at scale first, because you know we've only been to 15% of the units, and it's getting a sense of does it actually work and does it deliver value over other approaches that we could be using before we just start applying this to everything because it's shiny and exciting.
We had another question over there, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so maybe for both of you. I work in logistics, and our company has a current like AR software that, let's say, is in beta testing. But the problem that we have is limited or sometimes no connectivity. And the AR requires like live feedback from someone else on the other end. Do you have any advice on how to deal with poor limited connectivity? Because I know AR uses a huge amount of bandwidth.
It just depends. So we can build, so we build applications that can live offline and online. So that's just basically how you design your software. So you can definitely design that around. And when it hits a hot point, it connects to downloading the next kind of module. So I think that's really it's a software design issue. But I do agree. A lot of these devices, and especially as you go into a much more connected world, and this is why I'm kind of looking forward to the future a little bit, especially with the advent of 5G. You know, things are going to be connected all the time. So the work that you're doing in terms of probably solving the business problem, what it's for, again, it's so funny, the hype versus reality. The reality is that timing is incredibly important of when you make those investments, because if you go too early, you're going to hit the ditch, or if you don't have executive buy-in, if you don't have your IT support. So timing is incredibly important. So when you find your idea, sometimes, I'll be honest, we advise people just to wait. Maybe it's not right now. Maybe you got to wait a little bit. So to overcome some of those issues.
Oh, one last question. Last one.
Someone asked me this yesterday and I didn't have a very good answer, so maybe you've got a better one, which is I was trying to design something for virtual reality that was based on 360 video, and they said, well, what's the benefit of doing it in VR rather than just having it as a video? How would you answer that?
So it's a really interesting question, because we were talking about this with colleagues just the other day, and for us, part of the reason really with this particular project was that the lack of hardware just enabled us to shift there. But what we've really seen in terms of the feedback we've had from people who've done both, so basically the managers who've done our interactive video elsewhere and have done the VR bit here, is that immersion and that isolation, which in sort of the hustle and bustle of our operational environment. So they're very noisy, sort of intense places. There isn't really quiet space to retreat to. So something that's really sort of disconnecting your senses from the environment has been the feedback that we've seen.
And just to add to that, when we think, especially in training modules, again, that fear of failure, especially with your colleagues, being in a private, you can make mistakes. The biggest thing is when we're training is everyone wants to be perfect. Oh, I don't want to fail in front of my friends. And that's misses the point. And people actually aren't making mistakes, and that's what you learn from your mistakes. So having that immersive environment, I think, is kind of a real great feature of what VR, and as an application, that's really not going to change. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was fascinating. We were asked or posed the question by Don this morning to understand what's the bridge between the sessions and our workplace. For me, The immediate one is I need to speak to James and put him in contact with a colleague of mine called Andy, who's looking at designing some stuff for criminal justice, which I think will be really useful, because some of the stuff that you're doing is in that space, which would be useful for that conversation. And I would encourage you to do the same as well. I did ask, what's your real reason for coming today for this session? And I hope that the guys have been able to fill that real reason. I'm entirely satisfied with it. If we could please show our appreciation for Ryan, Peterson and James.